Hi, everyone. So thank you for joining us today. So today we are going to present to you one of our investigations about perhaps the most interesting backdoor that we've ever investigated, called Squidoor. And this presentation will not be just around the story, but it will be practical. We'll share our investigation process and insights, and you can actually gain benefit and incorporate it into your own work. So before we begin, let us just quickly introduce ourselves. So my name is Lior. I'm a threat researcher at the Cortex Threat Research Team in Palo Alto Networks. I specialize in threat hunting and tracking various nation-state threat actors.
And my name is Fakterman. I'm a senior threat researcher for the Cortex Threat Research Team in Palo Alto Networks, and I specialize in threat research and malware analysis.
Thank you, Tom. So today we are going to share this really interesting story about this backdoor that we discovered called Squidoor. We'll start off with some background of how we started this investigation and what we were initially hunting for. Then we'll dive into the attack flow and explore some of the main TTPs that we observed. Later on, Tom will walk us through the Squidoor backdoor itself, its capabilities, command and control methods, and how it was actually used in the attacks. Once we have some understanding on the Squidoor itself and the attack flow, we will share how we can actually catch a Squidoor. And we'll finish off with some key takeaways. So we have a very packed agenda today. Before we dive in, I wanted to set the stage and provide you with some context about this investigation. So what we uncovered is a cluster of activity, which we track as CL-STA0049, believed to be operated by a Chinese threat actor that has been active since at least March of 2023. This threat actor primarily targets two regions, Southeast Asia and South America, with a clear focus on high-profile organizations. And here's what makes this activity particularly interesting. The main backdoor used is Squidoor, a multi-platform modular backdoor that supports no less than 10 different communication channels, making it exceptionally difficult to detect and block. But hey, how it all started? Let's go to the beginning. So one of our main tasks as a team is to conduct hunting across our telemetry and search for both known threats and hidden attacks that haven't been reported before. We believe that it's crucial to do that if we want to hunt and search for these sophisticated adversaries. And to do that, we constantly monitor the global threat landscape and organize our work around specific hunting leads or hunting projects. And one of those hunting projects focused on IS exploitation. As history had taught us, IS servers are particularly vulnerable to attacks. Since 2021, we've seen a surge of different vulnerabilities that have made these servers extremely attractive targets for both cybercriminals and nation-state threat actors. What makes IS servers especially concerning is that many of the exploits do not require any type of authentication or credentials in order to execute. An attacker can just gain access without needing to steal or to crack passwords first. And to make matters even worse, despite the known risks, many IIS servers across organizations remain unpatched, creating a perfect storm of security gaps that adversaries are actively exploiting. And let's see some examples of how we perform this hunting. So we search for suspicious process trees under W3WP, the IIS worker process. A classic pattern that we watch for is something like W3WP, spawning some sort of a shell, such as CMD, that spawns suspicious commands, such as reconnaissance commands. And this type of activity often indicates an attacker has gained access and is now trying to understand the network topology, usually in an early phase of the attack. We also hunt and monitor for suspicious files created by W3WP, particularly in high-risk locations, such as www.root and various temporary folders. And this type of activity often indicates delivery of payloads by a web shell. So we took all these hunting queries that we created, and I showed you only two of them, and we ran them across our telemetry and examined the results. One incident immediately caught our attention. It was a potential compromise of a defense organization in Southeast Asia. Of course, it was very concerning to us, given the sensitive nature of defense infrastructure, and of course, the strategic importance of this region. So once we saw it, we immediately began the investigation. And let's dive a bit deeper into what we actually found and talk about the attack flow and some of the main TTPs. So since we started this investigation hunting for IS exploitation attempts, It's no surprise that the initial access vector was through an IIS server in the organization. But it was not that straightforward. Our investigation revealed multiple alerts showing attempted exploits against several IIS servers in the environment. Fortunately, most of these servers were already patched, so they successfully resisted the attacks. However, our threat actor demonstrated remarkable determination. They methodically worked their way through the organization infrastructure, testing for vulnerabilities across different IIS and web servers in the environment. Eventually, their persistence paid off when they discovered a single unpatched IIS server. And this one overlooked single server that missed the patch cycle was all they needed to establish a foothold in the environment and deploy the web shell that you see on the screen. And after gaining this initial foothold through this single unpatched IIS server, the threat actor immediately began expanding their presence throughout the network. Our investigation revealed that the threat actor methodically worked to ensure that they have multiple entry points to the environment by spreading their web shells to other IIS and web servers in the organization. First, they downloaded their primary web shell from an external bash upload service and stored it locally. Then they created multiple copies of the web shell and saving them under different file names. To disguise their malicious activity or malicious payloads, they employed a pretty clever technique, masquerading these web shells as legitimate certificate files before copying them remotely to other servers. And finally, they utilized curl commands to deploy these web shells on the newly targeted servers. And this methodical propagation strategy was a way to show us the level of sophistication and the persistence of the threat actor, because they really ensured that even if one entry point was discovered and removed, multiple others would remain available. And after spreading these web shells across the environment, the threat actor executed a chain of events that really caught our attention. We noticed this process called fondrvhost.exe running with this unusual parameter, a config.ini file. This immediately raised red flags to us. When we investigated it, we found out that it was actually not the legitimate Windows phone driver host at all, but it was actually a renamed cdb.exe, a Windows debugging utility. And this utility is actually listed as a living off-the-land binary, or lolbus, since it can be abused to load shellcodes in memory. But even though this technique is documented, at the time of the investigation, it was only known as a proof of concept. It was never reported seen in a real attack before. And our threat actor used this disguised utility to load the shellcode from the config.ini file that we saw and to load it in memory. And this shellcode contains a malicious binary inside, and when executed, it loads it in memory. When we investigated this really interesting DLL that was loaded reflectively, we found out that it's actually a new and undocumented backdoor, which we named Squidoor. And now I'll pass the stage to Tom to dive a bit deeper into the Squidoor backdoor itself, talk about its capabilities, command and control methods, and how it was actually used in the attacks.
Thank you, Lior. So as Lior mentioned, during our investigation, we came across this unidentified malware, which we eventually dubbed Squidoor. And we found versions of the Squidoor malware for both Windows and Linux systems. But the big picture is that this malware basically gives the attackers full control over the infected machine. It gives them capabilities like collecting information about the host, executing commands, manipulating files, and a lot of other stuff that it enables them to do. But the really interesting part, and what makes this malware so unique, is how it communicates with the command and control. Or to be more specific, in how many different ways it can communicate with the command and control. Squidoor is able to use 10 different communication methods on the Windows version, and 9 different ones on the Linux version. Now, some of these are pretty straightforward, like HTTP, reverse TCP, reverse UDP. Some are a bit more stealthy, like DNS tunneling or ICMP tunneling. And some are very unique, like abusing the Outlook Mail Client API for command and control. Being able to utilize so many different communication channels makes Squidoor very powerful. And that is because it enables the attackers to create a sort of a net of Squidoors inside an infected network. This is an illustration of one of the environments we investigated. And as you can see, it was filled with Squidoor implants who were communicating internally with each other. And to do that, they used different protocols. Some are using TCP, some are using SMB, some are using ICMP to communicate. But only very few Squidoor implants were actually used for external communication outside of the network. So this makes the attack a lot more stealthy. And we will soon explore how the attackers were able to abuse the Outlook mail client API. And we will see that whatever communication that does go out of the environment goes over completely legitimate services, which makes it very hard to detect. So I want to explore how the attackers are able to utilize Outlook for command and control. Now, this process is a bit complicated, so we divided it into 3 main stages to simplify it. In the first phase, Squidoor needs to log in into the Microsoft Identity Platform. In the second stage, Squidoor will send a unique identifier to the attackers. And in the final stage, Squidoor needs to receive commands to execute. So let's go stage by stage and see how it actually works. So the first stage, Squidoor is logging in into the Microsoft Identity Platform by using a refresh token, which is hard-coded into the malware configuration. After that, Squidoor needs to send a unique identifier. So let's see how this process works. Squidoor will use the Outlook REST API to query the attacker's email draft folder for an email with a very specific subject. The subject is P underscore, and then some random generated number. Now, this number is basically a unique identifier for that specific Squidoor instance that is running in memory. So by using a different unique identifier for each Squidoor, the attackers are able to utilize only a single Outlook mailbox to control a bunch of different implants all over the place. Now, if this is the first execution of Squidoor, it will not find this email yet in the attacker's mailbox. So it will create a new one and send it to the attackers. And the content of the email is just some random sequence of bytes, which is then encoded in base 64. So once the attackers finally receive this email, they know, OK, a new Squidoor has connected to my mailbox and is listening to execute some commands. So let's see how it's going to receive those commands. The process is kind of similar. Squidoor will again use the Outlook REST API to query the draft folders of the attacker's mailbox for an email with a very specific subject. This time the subject is R underscore, and then the same unique identifier it's sent to the attackers in the previous stage. And Squidoor will keep querying for this email in a loop until it finally finds it. And this is the exact query that Squidoor is using to find this email in the attacker's mailbox. Once the attacker finally decides to send some commands to Squidoor, Squidoor will find the email, retrieve the content, and delete the email from the attacker's mailbox. So by using this intricate process, the attackers are able to abuse Outlook to function as a command and control system. Now, before Squidoor is actually able to read the email and execute the commands, it needs to decrypt it because it has several layers of encryption and encoding. The first layer is decoded via base 64. The second layer is then decrypted via a combination of AES and XOR algorithms. And finally, the last layer is decompressed via zlib. And what we get after that is either, again, commands to execute or additional Squidoor modules to execute. During the investigation, we saw the attackers delivered a lot of different modules to enhance the capabilities of Squidoor. These modules included executing PowerShell commands, pass the hash attacks, loading shellcode, network enumeration, user account enumeration, and also uploading and deleting files to remote machines in the network. In here, you can see how those modules were used as part of the attack. Each one was injected into a different instance of an mspaint.exe process. And also, each one needs a different unique password in order to actually execute. OK, so there is one last aspect of Squidoor that I want to touch upon. When we went over Squidoor's configuration, inside we saw a pastebin URL, which was hard-coded. And when Squidoor is executing, it sends a HTTP GET request to that URL and retrieves the content, which is only the number 1. And then it does absolutely nothing with that information. So of course, it made us curious, why is it doing it? Why is it going to pastebin and doing nothing with it? So naturally, we went ourselves to pastebin, see what else was in this URL. And inside, we saw a bunch of different API keys and access tokens for a lot of different services. So it looks like the attackers use pastebin as a place to store some important data for their attacks. And some of you may have noticed that one of these pastebin pages has a lot more hits than the other ones. This is actually the page that I showed you in the previous slide that only contains the number 1. So we estimate that attackers are using this page as a way to count how many different Squidoor implants were ever executed and connected to pastebin. Now, we continue to track this pastebin page, and one day, everything inside has completely changed. All the bug files you see in front of you are censored, and that is because they contain names of different government agencies who are potentially compromised with the Squidoor malware. When we published our blog and research about Squidoor, we also shared this pastebin page. And like a day after our publication, the page was completely deleted and removed. So it's nice to see that it looks like the attackers read our blogs and act accordingly. OK, so now that we know a bit about how Squidoor operates and the different intricacies behind its command and control mechanisms, I'll pass the stage to Lior once again to talk about how to catch a Squidoor.
Thank you, Tom. OK, let's see how we can do that. And I will start with a tool that we use quite a lot, that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, VirusTotal. So our investigation started with this key observation. The threat actor had renamed the legitimate utility cdb.exe to fondrvhost.exe. We wanted to see how common this practice is and if maybe similar files were submitted to VirusTotal before. So when we searched this specific combination on VT, we found only 1 hit. And the file hash actually matches the file hash that we found in our investigation. But since cdb.exe is a legitimate Windows binary, it naturally had numerous submitters. However, 2 submitters caught our attention because they submitted it by the name fondrvhost.exe, running, not the cdb.exe, sorry. One submitter was from Singapore and another from Brazil, as you can see on the screen. We, of course, wanted to know what else those submitters submitted to VT that may be related to the attack. While pivoting on a specific VT submitter is not a standard VirusTotal feature, unfortunately, we still have a few ways to accomplish this anyway. So what we did is searching for submissions from Singapore within the same date range of the submission of the fondrvhost file. You can see the exact search on the screen. And this search returned approximately 200 files, and among them, we noticed a pretty familiar file, a file named config.ini. And this file turned out to be, well, you guessed it, an encrypted shellcode containing the Squidoor payload. We, of course, repeated the process with the Brazilian submitter as well, and found yet another Squidoor payload. And by the way, both of them had 0 detection hits when we first discovered them. And this was only one method or technique to pivot and hunt for Squidoor binaries. Let's see another way to do that, this time by leveraging VirusTotal Live Hunt feature. So we created custom YARA rules for Squidoor based on something very indicative. It's command and control methods. As you may remember, Squidoor supports 10 different command and control methods, and they are all clearly listed and named right in the code, as you can see on the screen. And this made the creation of effective YARA rules for Squidoor relatively simple or straightforward. And after we deployed these rules, we waited to see if we get any hits and if maybe new samples will be submitted to VirusTotal. And after a few days, we actually got a hit. This search uncovered an ELF version of the malware, revealing something very important that we hadn't known before. Squidoor actually exists in 2 versions, one targeting Windows systems, and another designed for Linux environments. And besides our VirusTotal discoveries, we also identified several effective ways to hunt for Squidoor in the network. The first one involves Squidoor Outlook communication channel. We found it effective looking for non-browser processes that communicates with both graphmicrosoft.com and Pastebin. This relatively unusual combination is actually a pretty strong indicator for Squidoor presence. The second method is involving the specific URL found in the network traffic. Searching for GET request containing the parameters that you see on the screen can also help reveal Squidoor presence, as those parameters appears when the malware tries to queries for command emails. And these hunting techniques demonstrate how intelligence gathered from initial discoveries can be transformed into practical hunting and detection methods across different security layers. So we took all these hunting queries that we created, and of course, we ran them across our telemetry. Once we examined the results, we found immediately several additional potential victims that we were initially not aware of. What stood out to us was the geographic pattern. While Southeast Asia was already known to us as a targeted region, our investigation revealed South America as yet another significant focus area of this threat actor. And as for the sectors being targeted, we also found a clear pattern. The targets were organizations in the governments, defense, telecommunication, aviation, and education sectors. And these are not just random targets. These are high-value organizations with access to very sensitive information, revealing this is a carefully planned operation with very specific intelligence goals. And this broader picture helped us to understand the threat actor true priorities. It helped us to see exactly who they are targeting, and also it helped us to understand the scope of the operation. And now that we are familiar with Squidoor and even know how to catch one, I'll pass the stage to Tom one last time to share with you some of our key takeaways.
Thank you, Lior. So let's try to summarize everything that we talked about. So the first point we really want you to take from this session is that threat actors only need a single unprotected asset in order to gain access to your environment. And I know it might sound obvious at this point. You may need to make sure that all of your systems are patched. But take as an example the victim we discussed at the start of our session. Most of their servers were indeed patched. But of course, it was Murphy's Law, and the attackers managed to find this single unprotected server and exploit it and start a full-fledged attack. So this is why we mention it again. Make sure that all of your systems are fully patched. The second point is that threat actors can and will try to hide in plain sight. Squidoor is using Outlook to mask its communication with the attackers. And we also talked about how the attackers use Pastebin, a legitimate site, to store some very important data for their attacks. So this very stealthy approach of hiding in plain sight makes traditional security monitoring a lot more challenging. And the last point we want to emphasize is the importance of intelligence-based hunting. By carefully analyzing and understanding the TTPs of our attackers, we created hunting queries and actionable intelligence, which in turn helped us to discover additional victims and also find other versions of the Squidoor malware. So this is why we always recommend to include intelligence-based threat hunting as part of your day-to-day hunting efforts. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to us today. We had a great time. And of course, now we'll answer some questions, if there are any.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Absolutely excellent. I know there are a few questions, probably got time for 2 or 3. Okay, so a couple of technical ones, and then I think there's a strategic one coming up. So with some Squidoor payloads injected directly into memory, e.g. via MS Paint or Conhost, and never touching disk, how effective do you think traditional AV or EDR solutions are, and what should replace them if they're not effective?
So really, the traditional AV approach of just looking for hashes or scanning the files does not work in this case. This is why we need to look at other stuff like behavioral detections or network detections and stuff like that really helped us discover this kind of threats.
Okay. I don't know, the questions aren't moving on the screen. There was one, which I can remember, which is a sort of strategic question, which is, could you put this in the context of what's going on geopolitically? China, Taiwan, et cetera, why is this being done? What's the aim? What do you know of the sort of people behind this type of thing? What can we expect more of this? Put it in its context, if you like.
I think let's start from the final part. We should expect more of this. I think basically with all the geopolitical conflicts in this area and China being a government that wants to know and rule basically everything, they tend to use different techniques, new techniques, try to bypass different, as you said, traditional antivirus mechanism and EDR solutions. They really try to use different channels, even unconventional one, like Outlook APIs, DNS tunneling, ICMP tunneling. We do use it quite a lot, and it's kind of become like a trend, specifically with China. And yeah, we need to expect to see it even growing.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, we've got another technical one up. Since Squidoor uses Outlook API, DNS, and ICMP for covert channels, which protocol do you think defenders currently misunderstand the most when they're trying to baseline the normal behavior that you talked about?
Oh, the most is the hard questions. I guess all of them...
Give us a short list. We don't have to measure.
Well, open your notes. But I guess all of them are ones that you need to watch out for. It's really interesting. I really like the Outlook one because it was so unique and uncommon, investigating and see how the attackers really use the legitimate API and how it works as a command and control mechanism for malware. So it was really amazing to see. And we see new stuff like that every day, new ways that attackers abuse legitimate services for command and control.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also think for DNS tunneling and ICMP tunneling, there are different techniques to find them in different network security solutions. But specifically with Outlook, it's you have it everywhere. You can't really block it, of course. So it's really a technique that blends in naturally in the network. So I think this one is the most misunderstood or missed.
I was trying to paraphrase the question I'd already seen from Lou, and we've done the first bit of it, but not really the second. So let's step out. You've been doing this really excellent, really interesting work that we had lots of questions about. We had lots of interest in the audience around this particular technique, this particular backdoor. But in terms of, as a whole, Chinese APTs and so forth, what messages would you have for the wider cyber defense community about the sort of things the technical community can be doing to get on top of this threat? You clearly think about it where you work. You've brought that to us today. What are the sort of wider lessons of this?
Well, I would say one of the most important things is don't be arrogant. Don't think it's not going to happen to me or to my company.
Right.
It's always important to check everything that looks suspicious, make sure that everything is patched. If you have an ADR or XDR, make sure you go over the alerts and check out if something looks suspicious, because we see a lot that people don't do that, and this is how attackers just manage to come in. We see a lot of alerts, but nobody's actually doing anything.
And just one of the lessons from the tech community will be the subject of our last question. Essentially, how long did this take? The end-to-end investigation, were there any bits that just went, okay, you got stuck and you had to extend it? So give us some lessons technically for managing these types of investigations from what you've been doing.
I think there are a lot of times when we feel frustrated because we get stuck and stuff like that. We can't get this file, or that threat actor removed it, or we don't know the command and control channel. In this case, it was kind of not straightforward. I think just understanding that there is someone out there trying to make you feel frustrated and confused, and try to think like an attacker. How would you make yourself confused? And then try to see what just doesn't add up, what a process that looks weird, or this how would I say, command and control, or even command line that doesn't seem right. Just look for these specific and small details that many threat actors leave by accident, or even specific.
Well, I can't resist. We're about to go a minute over time, but it's linked to that. The backdoor is pretty advanced, but what did you observe apart from pastebin? What were they how advanced were they? What would the attacker infrastructure look like to you?
So we shared some of the the HTTP variants, like the IOCs related to it. In terms of infrastructure, so we saw that threat actor really used a lot of the pastebin to store different components and stuff, and also used the email accounts to store different components. So they used that quite a lot, but of course they also had this HTTP normal web command control that they used. But yeah, it was a bit different because they really used pastebin and Outlook mostly in the attack.
Yeah, also on pastebin, as I said, we saw a bunch of access tokens to other services. Like one of them, I think, was Google Cloud, which we didn't actually see used by it, but it kind of
Potential
hint,
is there.
maybe they plan to use it in the future or something like that. So it's also stuff to watch out for.
Well, we can talk to Google Cloud, our sponsors, about that. And I know you're around during the break, and I know the technical questions are ablaze on Slido, but for now, Lior and Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.